how did I go from traveling to Japan in business class like this and this to having no flight home up until 2 days before needing to come back? It's one thing to learn about booking travel with points or maximizing credit card benefits, but it's another thing to execute, as there's so much more to it when actually going on these trips. And although I've been on over 15 flights to 10 different airports, saving over $37,000 over the last year or so, I'm still learning and screwing up like I did having just gotten back from a trip to Japan, Korea, and New York. But before that, how did I travel to Japan in the first place, experiencing Air Canada business class that would have costed me over $2,000 but only paying $38 instead? The answer? Credit card points. You see, the distance between Vancouver and Osaka is 4,957 miles, which falls right under the 5,000 mile threshold on this Air Canada flight award chart, meaning it would cost as little as 55,000 points to book that one-way business class ticket, which is exactly what myself, my partner, and some friends did 3 months earlier. And before you say, hey, where am I gonna get 55,000 Aeroplan points? Well, there are a few ways, with the easiest one being credit card welcome bonuses. From just one of Chase's most popular cards, the Sapphire Preferred, giving you more than enough on the welcome bonus alone, to even a couple of the no annual fee Freedom cards adding up to almost enough themselves, or the Amex Gold, Venture, or Venture X cards, each of them giving you enough points for that flight alone. As long as you spend within your means and use your natural spend to hit those limits, there's really no downside just focusing all of your spend on one card for a few months to unlock those points. That, or sometimes you can even buy credit card points like Aeroplan points at 1.28 cents per point, which would make those 55,000 Aeroplan points only costing you just over $700, similar to what you would pay flying economy. So that's how my travel group and I got to Japan in the first place, by being flexible with our dates and destinations and having points on hand to book whenever a spot showed up. After that, my partner and I did a short hop over to Korea flying Korean Air, which was paid for by the annual $300 travel credit on my Capital One Venture X card. But that was it. At that point, I had no other flight coming back home from Korea, even though I needed to be back by a certain day. And at that time, I thought it was going to be okay, like, hey, last year I found 3 last-minute flights on ANA business class coming back from Japan, so I can do it again, right? Not exactly. It wasn't that I wasn't trying. I had alerts set up on seats.aero, and I was even doing live searches in case things popped up and wasn't picked up with the system yet. All of which only took like 30 seconds to a minute each time I did so. But a tip here for those of you that do use seats.aero, know that sometimes when your search is too wide, it'll only return cached results. I'm not sure exactly how often they do a live query to refresh that cache, but it's something to keep in mind where you may not see the latest availability when you do your search. But despite all of that effort across the months and weeks leading up to the trip, and including part of the trip as well, I had no luck, and things only got worse. A few months back, I did see some economy class redemptions, flying from Korea through LAX back to Seattle for about 47,000 points. And honestly, if I followed my own advice and booked this flight early as a backup flight, maybe I wouldn't be as stressed or worried about having a flight back. The thing is, at the same time, I was also looking at cash fares flying direct from Korea back to Seattle, which was only going for about $700 to $800. Since I would be transferring my Chase points over to Aeroplan for this redemption, and that I value my Chase points at 2 cents per point, that means my two options were using points, so 47,000 points times 2 cents per point, giving a value of $940, and that's including a layover and before fees, or $800 direct. However, given the cash fare, even though it's better value, is non-refundable, I just couldn't choose and hesitated on booking, so I just waited and waited. Unfortunately, when I was about a month out from leaving on my trip, I was like, hey, I'll just lock in that points redemptions so there's some sort of backup, and hoping that I could still pay a change fee and change to a better flight whenever one comes up. But when I went back to look at those flights, they were all gone. The only ones left had long layovers or costed way more in points just in economy class, which really just wasn't worth it. And so I continued to wait, spending like a minute every day running the search again, hoping that something would come up. But the urgency just grew and grew, because one of the rules that I pretty much broke on this trip was that I wasn't being flexible. Usually I wouldn't mind a little longer of a layover or adjusting my plans a little bit, but I needed to be back on a certain day because I was flying to New York on a work trip the morning after. On top of that, cash fares were continuing to climb, where flights in economy were exceeding $1,000 per ticket. Plus, it was a Sunday that I needed to fly, which made things just that much worse. And because I needed 2 tickets, which is a lot harder than 1, I was hesitant to lock those cash fares in because again, they weren't going to be refundable. But here's where things take a turn. When I was comparing flights home in economy, premium economy, and business class, I noticed that Delta was selling tickets from Seoul, Korea to Seattle direct, only costing $1,270, which was only a couple $100 more than economy flights at that time, which may have even needed a layover. What's more is that the more I dug into it, I realized that these fares were completely refundable. Now, I've never flown Delta long haul, so I don't know if this is pretty common, but at this point, it was only about 2 days before I needed to fly back, so I had to lock this in. It also departed in the evening, meaning we pretty much got almost another full day in Seoul to explore a different area. Combine that with our 4 p.m. late checkout from our guest of honor stay at the Park Hyatt Seoul, made a perfect fit. So with the price similar to economy but better, flying direct, giving us more time to explore in Seoul, and being refundable, meaning I could technically still last minute change to a different flight, although it would be really last minute, I had to lock this in. Though being someone who always wants to find the best deal, it did still hurt a little bit having to pay so much out of pocket for a non-business class seat flying just one way. At that point, I was already thinking things like, hey, this is just the price I had to pay, taking on a risk without a backup, trying to get a better flight. Or if I averaged out the price I didn't have to pay on the flight there, then it wouldn't actually be that bad. Or sharing this experience with you all about how sometimes taking the risk to find good redemptions may not pay off. So off we went, using the time during the day to explore the Seongsu area of Seoul, which lots of people have said is the new hot area of the city, or it's like the Brooklyn of New York City, before heading out on our flight. But wait, hold on, that wasn't a Delta plane. And this is not a premium economy seat. You see, we ended up getting really lucky again, and here's what happened. The day before we were going to fly, I was checking seats.aero again without that much hope. And of course, again, we saw nothing. However, because of the caching issue we talked about earlier in the video, I went directly to Aeroplan's website to see if there was anything new. And to my surprise, I saw a redemption flying United Polaris business class from Incheon through SFO for a few hour layover back up to Vancouver for just 73,400 points plus about $72 in fees. And that actually worked out because I realized I forgot my work laptop in Vancouver and not Seattle, so I needed to go back up there anyways. Also, because we were flying United Business Class and going through SFO, we would be able to check out the Polaris Lounge in SFO during the layover and enjoy their a la carte dining again, just like we did last year in LAX. The only downside was the flight was scheduled to leave in the morning at 11:30 a.m., pretty much cutting out an entire day in Seoul, meaning we wouldn't be able to explore the new area. Fortunately, if you could say that, the flight was delayed by 8 hours because of a crew rest issue, meaning the crew probably went over their limit and they needed to rest or call in a brand new crew to do the flight back. Usually for delays like weather or maintenance, the actual time they depart could be earlier than the delay time they first put out. But because this was a crew issue and the plane was already landed and just waiting, it was pretty certain that the new flight time of 7:30 p.m. was gonna stick. Even then though, just in case, we went to the airport like we were gonna fly at 11:30 a.m. to drop off our bags because we didn't know if the baggage drop-off time would also have been moved. Then we took an airport shuttle bus out to the Seongsu area for most of the day and exploring there before heading back for our flight. So a lot of things went wrong, but also a lot of things went right. So to recap, a couple of days before, we locked in a refundable premium economy flight on Delta for $1,270, thinking that was gonna be it. The literal day before we were gonna leave, we found a United business class redemption going through SFO up to Vancouver for 73,400 points. At a similar 2 cents per point value, that puts us just under $1,500, which I would gladly pay for a business class ticket. Even though the flight was originally scheduled for 11:30 a.m., cutting a day out of our schedule, it got delayed to 7:30 p.m., meaning it would still give us that day to explore. And because there were plenty of Star Alliance flights going from SFO to Vancouver on Air Canada and United, they were able to easily put us on a later flight that day. All of this didn't happen without hiccups though, because I found this out while we were out and about enjoying the city, meaning I had to make this booking and transfer my points to Aeroplan all on my phone. The issue here was, in order to transfer points from my Amex account over to Aeroplan, it asked me for the 3-digit code on the front of my actual card. But because my Amex Platinum card was in the hotel room, and we usually don't need that number, usually you use the back 4-digit number, I was lost. Fortunately though, I did have my Amex Green card with me, so I could just swap over to that card and transfer points from there, given they share the same pool of points, so it all ended up working out. Phew. And because our second leg of the trip had to be rebooked further than 12 hours after, it wasn't really detected as an official layover. That meant that checking in for our second flight, it asked us to pay for our bags, and because some of our bags were overweight, it was hundreds of dollars. Fortunately, the agents there were pretty nice and patient and ended up overriding the system to get us through. So that was my story across this pretty short 1.5 week trip to Asia. But I also made some mistakes on my work trip to New York City that I had to fly out from literally the day after returning from Asia. As in, I got to Vancouver 9-10 p.m., went back to my parents' place, did some laundry, packed for the week, and flew out 10 a.m. the next day. But because my vacation plans were up in the air for so long, I also had to wait to book my New York flight, to the point where the direct flights were sold out, and so I had to route through another city before going to New York, and so I routed through Seattle. Again, booking far in advance would save you a lot of these headaches. But also, when coming back from New York City, I wanted to try out JetBlue, given I've heard a ton of good things about them, like having the most legroom in coach or having entertainment at every seat. I also wanted to check out the new Chase Sapphire Lounge at JFK, given I had access using one of my priority passes on the Venture X or the American Express Platinum card. Now, for those of you familiar with JFK or the area, you're probably seeing an issue here. My mistake was I didn't check which terminal lounges were at JFK, which ended up being pretty much just Terminal 1 or Terminal 4, which is also where the Chase Sapphire Lounge was. JetBlue, and pretty much just JetBlue, flies out of Terminal 5. That was also the time I realized that for JFK, all of the terminals are separate and you can't get between them easily, and not at all when you're past security. And so not only was I not able to check out the Sapphire Lounge, I wasn't able to check out any lounge at all. Bummer. Alright, so I learned a ton over just the last few weeks, most of which are things you kind of have to experience firsthand to really learn about. Although hopefully you don't have to go through them to learn. So here's my takeaways. 1, be flexible. Don't put vacation right up against work travel, especially when you're trying to do award travel and aren't set on your dates yet. 2, have a backup flight ready, like one where you can pay a minimal cost to change your flight, or maybe go the refundable fare route. 3, check redemptions often, but also run the searches in a live way, or go to the airline's website directly to search that way. Again, because services like seats.aero may have cached results. 4, if you want to visit lounges, check which terminal the loungers are in ahead of time, and that you can get between your gate and the lounge pretty easily. And in my case, everything kind of ended up working out nicely. From a trip with no return flight, to having to pay top dollar booking economy flights back, to a pretty solid redemption last minute. It didn't end up being costly in terms of dollars, but I would say it was somewhat costly when it comes to time spent or just mental space and stress. It's definitely not for everyone. I personally found it to be a net positive experience though, given I enjoy these things and I was able to experience 2 new business class products, Air Canada and United, with my partner and some friends, all for just a few $100s and some credit card points. That said, this trip is no match for the one last year, flying to Singapore, Korea, and Japan, yes again, on Singapore Airlines for 4 people entirely on points, and a ton of other learnings. So go on and check out this video for an entire breakdown on that trip. Happy savings, and I'll see you over there.